There are moments that split your life in two. Before the cake, after the scream. Sophie turned 10 that day. Double digits. She picked the theme herself, rainbows and sunflowers. She wore a yellow dress, the one her father said made her look like summer. I braided her hair that morning with small golden beads at the ends. She looked in the mirror and whispered, "I feel like magic." And for a moment so did I. The apartment filled with laughter by noon. Balloons swayed on string. Neighbors trickled in with gift bags and kind eyes. Even Margaret came. Late, of course, but present. My mother-in-law stood in the doorway wearing pearls like armor and carrying a cake she claimed she baked herself. "For my sweet girl," she said, presenting it like a trophy. White frosting, pink piping. Candied flowers that glittered like glass. Sophie's eyes lit up. I paused, because Margaret never baked. She barely boiled water without burning the pot. But it was her granddaughter's birthday, and I was tired of being the paranoid one, so I smiled. "Thank you," I said, even though it tasted like ash. The candles were lit, 10 tiny flames for 10 tiny wishes. Sophie closed her eyes and blew them out in one breath. Everyone clapped. I held my breath. Margaret insisted on serving the cake. Cut it herself, plate by plate. I took a small slice. Smelled it, tasted nothing unusual. Maybe this was peace. Maybe we were turning a page. I let my guard down. Sophie took her first bite and giggled. "It's sweet." She ran to the living room, dancing between ribbons and wrapping paper. And then the giggle cracked. Her hand reached for her throat. Eyes wide, face flushed. Then pale, then blue. The plate hit the floor, the room froze. Someone shouted her name. I was already moving. I grabbed the EpiPen from the drawer, ripped the cap off. "Hold her still." My voice wasn't even mine, just instinct. I stabbed it into her thigh like we'd practiced, hoping, praying. Seconds stretched, then she gasped, then coughed, then cried. And I cried too. Sirens came next. Neighbors stood in doorways. I rode in the ambulance holding her hand. James sat beside us, white as a ghost. No one said birthday again that day. At the hospital they ran tests, monitors beeped. Machines blinked. Sophie drifted in and out. They said it was anaphylaxis. Severe, dangerous. "You're lucky you acted fast," the nurse said. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like someone had dropped a piano on my chest and expected me to sing, while James stayed with Sophie. I walked out into the corridor and called the only person who'd know what to say, Iris, my best friend. My mirror. I told her everything, the party, the cake, Margaret. And when I mentioned the frosting, I heard her sharp inhale. "Didn't you say Sophie's nut allergy was listed on every single invitation?" I nodded, tears slipping through. "Latifa," she said quietly, "you think she did it on purpose?" I didn't answer, because I already knew the answer. When I got home that night, I pulled the trash bag out of the bin and opened the cake box. It smelled like almond, not vanilla, not buttercream, and beneath the frosting when I dug with a spoon, walnuts. Visible, bold, intentional. I sank to the kitchen floor. My hands were shaking. My breath came in short, broken waves. Margaret had been told. She knew. We'd discussed it, argued over it, repeated it. I remembered her words months ago when I caught her sneaking peanut butter into the pantry. A little exposure might make her stronger. And now, she almost killed my daughter. The next morning, I opened Sophie's backpack to pack her clean clothes. Found a card from Margaret tucked inside. "My sweet girl, hope you're feeling better. Sorry the cake didn't agree with you. Some kids just aren't built tough these days. Love, Nana." I stood there reading it again and again. Not an apology, not regret. Just contempt wrapped in cursive. And that's when something snapped inside me. Not anger. Not grief. Clarity. This wasn't just an accident. This was an attack. Disguised as family. She thought she'd get away with it. With a smile and cake and a note, but she didn't know me. I cleaned the spoon, bagged the cake, stored the card, evidence, because this time I wasn't just a mother. I was a storm. She called it a birthday surprise. I call it what it really was, an attempt to erase my daughter with frosting and fake love. On the outside, we looked like a family, holiday cards, matching sweaters, forced smiles under twinkling lights. But behind every photo, there was a war. And the battlefield was always my motherhood. Margaret didn't become cruel overnight. She peeled away at me slowly, with compliments wrapped in correction, with soft judgment hidden behind traditions. "Sophie's too sensitive. We never had allergies back in my day. You're raising her soft, Latifa. At first, I tried to win her over, brought her flowers on Sundays, invited her to parent-teacher conferences, included her in every holiday plan. But kindness only works on people who see you as human. To Margaret, I was always the girl who married her son, never a mother. Never enough. When Sophie was 2, she broke out in hives after a bite of cookie. It was Daniel's birthday. I rushed her to urgent care. The diagnosis was swift, nut allergy, severe, life-threatening. We changed everything after that. No nuts in the house. Emergency plans, 2 EpiPens, school alerts, bracelet with her condition. Margaret called it overreacting. 1 bad cookie and you treat her like glass. At Thanksgiving that year, she tried to give Sophie a special pie she made herself. I asked about the filling. She said, just apples. I checked the crust ingredients, almond flour. I said no, firmly. She didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. James always tried to stay neutral. But neutrality doesn't work when someone's life is at stake. She doesn't mean harm, he'd say. She's just old-fashioned, set in her ways. But old-fashioned shouldn't mean reckless. And set in her ways didn't excuse setting traps for my daughter's health. The more I pushed back, the more she pushed harder. She started sending snacks for Sophie in unlabeled bags, dropping off muffins without ingredient lists, commenting publicly about how kids today are too fragile. Every confrontation turned me into the villain. You're so uptight. You never let me bond with her. She's my granddaughter too. But love doesn't look like risk, and bonding shouldn't feel like sabotage. I began to keep records, notes, texts, dates of every close call. One time, I found peanut butter crackers in Sophie's backpack after a sleepover at Margaret's. James defended her. She probably just didn't remember, but I remembered everything. I remembered how she looked at me when I reminded her of the allergy the first time. If she never experiences it, how will she build immunity? Like Sophie was a science project. Like her life was an experiment. The tipping point wasn't the cake. It came earlier. Last spring, we were having brunch at our place. Margaret arrived unannounced with her famous banana bread. I asked, as I always did, "What's in it?" She laughed. "Just love and bananas, dear." I cut into it while she was in the bathroom. Pecans. Sliced thin. Hidden. I didn't confront her. Not then. I threw it out. Said Sophie wasn't hungry. But after she left, I sat in the kitchen and cried like someone had opened a door to a truth I didn't want to walk through yet, because it wasn't about bread. Or cake, or pie, or cookies. It was about power. About a woman who couldn't stand that she wasn't in control anymore. A woman who saw my child's allergy not as a danger, but as a weakness to be corrected. And now, after the birthday party, after the hospital, after the card tucked like a knife into my daughter's backpack, I was done making room for her. I opened the shoebox under my bed where I kept the old photos, family dinners, backyard games. Sophie's first swim. Margaret was in every one of them, smiling, perfect. But behind those photos, there was me, cut off at the edges, always one step away from being erased. I picked up the phone and called James. His voice was quiet, tired. "We need to talk," I said, "about your mother." And for once he didn't interrupt. He just listened. I told him everything. The cake, the walnuts, the note. She didn't forget, I said. She chose. He didn't argue. He just whispered, "What do we do now?" I paused, then said it aloud for the first time. The words tasted strange, like strength. We take her to court. It wasn't one cake, it was years of quiet sabotage. A long war behind smiles. But this time I wouldn't fight quietly. This time I'd take it all the way. People say birthdays are meant for joy. For candles, for wishes whispered between frosting and breath. But for us, that cake became a funeral in disguise. Sophie almost died because someone called it just a slice. The doctor said it was seconds, maybe 30, maybe 40. But to me, it was forever. The sound of her gasp. The way her eyes widened, not with fear, but betrayal. As if her body knew someone had fed her poison with a smile. We stayed in the pediatric ICU overnight. Machines hummed around us. Monitors blinked like impatient eyes. I didn't sleep. I just watched her chest rise and fall, counted each breath like a prayer. James sat beside me, silent, wringing his hands. He hadn't spoken to his mother since the party. Do you think she knew?
He asked at one point. I turned to him, not with rage.
With truth. She knew. Sophie's medical records were in Margaret's email. We sent them again after every flare-up. We printed laminated copies and stuck them on the fridge in bold red. The school knew. The babysitter knew. The delivery guy from the Thai place knew, but somehow his mother forgot. Again, I went home the next afternoon to grab fresh clothes, to shower, to breathe without monitors and latex. When I opened the fridge, the cake was still there. I took it out, cut through the second layer, walnuts, visible, chunked, not even ground. She didn't try to hide them. She didn't care if we saw them. I sat at the kitchen table with a spoon in my hand and a weight in my throat. I thought about that moment, when Sophie took her first bite, when she smiled, and how that smile broke into silence and to collapse into a scream I still hear when it's quiet. I opened my phone, went to Margaret's text thread, scrolled up, past the holiday emojis, past the passive-aggressive reminders, past the just checking-ins, until I found it. 3 weeks before the party, my message, remember no nuts. Sophie's allergy is still severe. Please no baked goods unless they're cleared. Her reply, of course I'm not reckless, Latifa. I screenshot it, attached it to a folder I titled, Intent. Then I took a spoon, scooped out the cake, placed it into a labeled bag, sealed it, placed it into the freezer next to the peas and guilt. Evidence. Later that week, Sophie woke up and whispered, "Did Grandma make me sick?" I blinked. Felt the air leave my lungs like a door slamming. She was 10, and she knew. I sat beside her, brushed the hair from her forehead. She gave you something you weren't supposed to have. She didn't cry, she just nodded. Like this was a fact she had already lived with. Like children always know what the adults pretend not to see. The nurse walked in, smiled, checked vitals, asked if we had any visitors coming. I said no, and meant it. I drove straight to the police station that afternoon, walked in with the bag, with the screenshots, with the card Margaret left in Sophie's bag. I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to explain the emotion. Just the facts. The officer was kind, surprised, but not dismissive. You're saying your mother-in-law knowingly gave your daughter an allergen? I'm saying she tried to kill her, I replied. And I didn't flinch. They took it seriously. Because the law doesn't care if someone shares your last name. If the facts hold, intent, risk, pattern, it becomes something else. It becomes endangerment. We filed the report. The official one, they opened a case. And I opened a window that night back at the apartment just to let the stale air out. Just to remind myself that something still moved freely in this house. James didn't argue. He read the police report twice, then closed it and said, whatever happens, she doesn't get to see Sophie again. Not a whisper of protest. Not a whimper of denial. Just a father who finally chose his daughter. 3 days later, they arrested her. Child endangerment. Intent to cause harm through ingestion. I stood behind a tinted glass window as they cuffed her in her driveway. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked at the cameras like someone who couldn't believe her version of the story wasn't the one they accepted anymore. I didn't celebrate. There are no victories when family becomes evidence. Only a cold kind of justice. But justice all the same. She called it a birthday gift. But it came with ingredients meant to silence my daughter forever. Now she's the one who has to explain what was baked into that cake. The hospital had machines that beeped with warning. The courtroom had silence so loud it made my bones shake. Justice doesn't smell like disinfectant. It smells like old wood, coffee in paper cups, and the tension of people pretending they're not terrified. I wore a navy dress. No makeup, hair tied back. Because this wasn't about performance. It was about truth. And truth, when held in the hands of a mother, doesn't need decoration. Margaret sat at the defense table in a beige sweater and stiff posture. She looked older, not weaker. Just further away from who she used to pretend to be. Her lawyer called it a misunderstanding, an accident. A regrettable moment of oversight from a well-meaning grandmother. I sat still. Because fury, when channeled through stillness, can break sound barriers. The prosecutor held up the bag from my freezer. The cake sample, pointed at it like a loaded gun. The child in question has a documented nut allergy. This cake was brought by the defendant, and it contains visible walnut pieces. Margaret didn't flinch. She didn't deny it either. They played the voicemail recording from her neighbor's doorbell camera. Her voice clear. Just a little exposure, she'd be fine. I can't baby her forever. The room went quiet. You could hear someone shift in the second row. James sat beside me, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. His mother, on trial, his wife stoned beside him. His daughter, recovering in the aftermath, he asked to testify. No one expected it, not even me. When he took the stand, he didn't speak like a son. He spoke like a father who'd learned too late what silence costs. We gave her chances, he said. We begged, we warned, we reminded, and she chose to ignore us. He looked at the jury, his voice breaking once. That cake wasn't love. It was control disguised as tradition. William, her husband, was next. I didn't know he planned to testify. His hands trembled as he stepped forward. She said it would toughen the girl up, he said quietly. But what she did was break something that might never heal. I sat frozen, not from shock, from validation. Because sometimes, the hardest thing in the world is watching people you once feared say out loud what you've whispered for years. The defense tried to pivot. They brought up Margaret's age, her clean record, her contributions to the community. But the law doesn't care if you once organized a church bake sale. Not when you bake a weapon and serve it with frosting. The final moment came when the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood slowly, the room blurred at the edges. But my voice didn't. My daughter almost died, I said. Because someone who claimed to love her couldn't stand not being in control. I looked at Margaret. She didn't meet my eyes. I've spent years making excuses for her, covering for her, trying to be the bigger person, but there is no size big enough to overlook this. I turned to the jury. This isn't about revenge. It's about protection. I'm a mother. I was built to protect. And I sat down. The deliberation didn't take long. The verdict, guilty. Child endangerment, intent to cause harm through negligence. 3 years, with no parole. Margaret didn't cry. She looked stunned. As if the world had shifted and no one told her the gravity changed. As they took her away, she glanced back once. But not at me. At James, and for the first time, he didn't flinch. He looked at her like a man who finally saw the cost of ignoring the smoke just because it came from your own kitchen. We left the courtroom in silence. No celebration, no closure, just space. And that space felt like safety. That night I climbed into bed with Sophie. Her breathing was soft, steady. She clutched her stuffed animal like it had a heartbeat. I whispered to her, half asleep myself, "You're safe now." We made sure of it. And in the dark, for the first time in weeks, I heard her tiny voice whisper back, "I know, Mama." They say justice is blind. But I think it sees clearly, once a mother's voice finally stops shaking. When a storm passes, it doesn't leave silence. It leaves pieces, branches, mud tracks on hardwood floors. And the unsettling question, what now? After the sentencing, the apartment felt unfamiliar. Not because she'd been in it, but because of everything we'd said to protect ourselves from the truth. We stopped pretending. We stopped calling dysfunction tradition. We stopped inviting chaos into our home just because it shared our blood. And in that space, something new began. Sophie had nightmares the first few nights. She'd wake up sweaty, clutching her chest, asking if the cake lady was gone. It broke me to hear her call her that. But it told the truth. She didn't see Margaret as family anymore. She saw her as danger, and that was earned. We started therapy, not just for Sophie, for all of us. Family sessions. One-on-one. Silent walks home after appointments where no one knew what to say, but we said it anyway. James cried during the second session. I'd never seen him cry without grief attached to it. This time, it was guilt. "I thought I was keeping the peace," he said. "But all I did was hand my mother a loaded spoon and pray she wouldn't to pull the trigger." He didn't ask me to forgive him. He asked to do better. And that meant more. William, surprisingly, became a constant. He visited once a week. Always brought fruit. Never brought Margaret's name. He sat with Sophie and helped her plant herbs in the kitchen window box. Basil, rosemary, tiny green beginnings growing out of broken places. One afternoon, he brought over a box. Inside, baby photos of James. A faded wedding photo of him and Margaret. A letter. "I'm filing for divorce," he said simply. I should have done it years ago. I didn't speak, just nodded. Because some decisions don't need applause, just acknowledgement. He told us he was donating Margaret's unused inheritance to children's hospitals with allergy clinics. Maybe this way, something good can still come from what she tried to destroy. Sophie started smiling again, not all at once, but in moments, when we baked cookies and she measured the flour herself. When her classmates surprised her with a hand-drawn card. When she read aloud and stumbled over the word anaphylaxis, but laughed anyway, progress isn't loud, it's quiet. It shows up in uneventful mornings and slow forgiveness. I bought her a new bracelet. Engraved this time, not just her allergy, but the word safe. Because she deserved to read that every time she looked at her wrist. James and I began dating again. That's what it felt like. After 10 years of marriage, we became new people who had to learn each other again. We sat on park benches and talked like strangers who carried history in their bones. We didn't rush. Because anything built to last should be built slowly. One morning I found a drawing taped to the fridge. A stick figure version of our family, 3 people. Me, James, and Sophie. And behind us a giant yellow sun with a smiley face. Beneath it, she'd written in purple crayon, "We're okay now." I stared at that drawing for a long time. Because, okay, wasn't a place I thought we'd reach. But here we were, standing in the wreckage, planting flowers. Not to pretend it never happened, but to remind ourselves that even after fire, something still grows. And when people ask me now if I regret what we did, taking her to court, cutting her off, breaking the silence, I tell them, I don't regret protecting my daughter. I regret how long it took to believe I was allowed to. Healing doesn't come with applause. It comes with whispered bedtime stories, quiet mornings, and the sound of a little girl laughing again. There's something cruel about blowing out candles when you've already survived the darkness. Sophie's 11th birthday arrived quietly. No fanfare, no glitter. Just soft sunlight and the scent of vanilla drifting from the kitchen. We didn't throw a party. We didn't send invitations. No bounce house, no photos for social media. Just the 3 of us. And peace. I baked the cake myself. Read every label, twice, triple-checked the frosting. Measured the sugar like I was measuring breath. Not because I was afraid, because I cared. Because love pays attention. Sophie helped this time. Cracked the eggs. Licked the spoon. Covered the top in little rainbow sprinkles and stuck the candles in herself. 10, 11. She smiled. Last year was weird, she said casually. This one feels better. We nodded. Because some things don't need to be remembered out loud. When she blew out the candles, I didn't cry. Not like before. This time my eyes stayed dry, but my heart melted in my chest like wax, because we had made it. She was here, alive, safe, smiling. James handed her a gift, a small music box, carved from walnut wood. The irony didn't escape me, but she didn't flinch. She opened it. It played, "You Are My Sunshine." And inside, a tiny gold charm shaped like a sunflower. She hugged us both. Then danced barefoot in the living room to a song she made up on the spot. Her laughter wrapped around us like armor. And for a moment it felt like last year never happened, but it did. And pretending it didn't would be a different kind of erasure. So after cake I sat her down. We lit a single tea candle on the porch and placed it beside a jar of wildflowers. This is for what we survived, I told her, not to relive it. Just to remind ourselves that we did. She nodded. Her eyes didn't water. But she reached for my hand and squeezed. Will Grandma ever come back? She asked. A pause. A breath. And then, not to us, I said. She looked down. I don't want her to. And that was it. No tears, no confusion. Just a child who understood something most adults don't, that love without safety ISN. Love at all. William called that night. Sang her happy birthday over the phone. His voice was warm, steady. The kind of sound that felt like a quilt on a cold day. He mailed her a card with a pressed tulip inside. On the back, "You are more loved than you'll ever understand. Grandpa Boru." We taped it to her wall. There were no letters from Margaret, no calls, no apologies, just silence. And silence, when it comes from those who once hurt you, is its own kind of closure. I kept the court documents in a folder on the highest shelf. Not because I needed them, but because I wanted to remember that one day I stood up. Not just for my daughter, but for the woman I'd become. A woman who no longer accepted invitations to pain just because they arrived wrapped in family titles. As the sun dipped, Sophie curled up on the couch with a book. I stood in the doorway and watched her read, her brow furrowed, lips moving silently. Completely unaware of how much power lived in her tiny growing body, James came behind me, wrapped his arm around my shoulder. We didn't speak, we just stood there. 3 people. 1 birthday. And a future no longer held hostage by anyone else's choices. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's a candle that stays lit. Her birthday almost became her eulogy. But she made it to 11. With frosting she could eat, a family who paid attention and love that didn't come with a warning label. If you've ever had to choose peace over family, drop a fire in the comments. Not every goodbye needs closure, some just need courage.